you see your tracks pretty regularly that year, pretty often?
Oh yeah, we see them. It seems like that you see them more when the.
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments.
Back in February of 1967, John Green interviewed Shorty Wallace and Jay Rowland. Shorty Wallace, as some of you may know, was a younger brother of the notorious prankster, and some would say hoaxer, Ray Wallace. And Jay Rowland was a good friend of Shorty Wallace, as well as a co-worker. They both worked for Wallace Brothers Construction back in 1958 in Northern California, in the Bluff Creek area, where Jerry Crew found the infamous footprints that would spawn the legend of Bigfoot, so to speak. Even though the word Bigfoot had been used before and prints had been found, it really took off in 1958 with Jerry Crew finding what he found on one of the work sites of the Wallace Brothers Construction. Now, because both Shorty and Jay were working in 1958 in the Bluff Creek area, they had a lot of information to provide to John Green. So I would say that this interview is quite historic, and it really sheds light on what was going on at the time and other things that happened too that many people may not be aware of, because it wasn't just Jerry Crew finding footprints and casting those. There were other things that were going on as well. So this interview, I think, it really speaks volumes, and I hope you enjoy it and see the historical tidbits and pieces that kind of put the puzzle together. Sit back and relax and enjoy it. I will, as usual, now I will interject and stop and make comments here and there and give a reaction to what's being said, because some things may not be easy to hear and some things may need a little more explanation. So here we go.
1967. We're talking to Shorty Wallace and Jay Rowland. Shorty, you've been in this country ever since these big tracks started to show up in Bluff Creek, haven't you?
Yes, I've been here all the time since '54, except for 1 year I was gone in '57. Other than that, I've been here all the time.
Any idea how many of these tracks you might have seen in that time?
Oh, man, I wouldn't even estimate how many I've seen, because I've followed them a lot of times on the road for 3 or 4 miles at a time on several different occasions. So I don't know how many I've seen.
These tracks will just run along straight up the road.
Yeah, that's right. Right on the road.
For miles, following.
Yeah.
I see.
And Jay can tell you the same thing.
Well, now that's interesting that Shorty, who was talking there, claims to have followed tracks, Bigfoot tracks, on several different roads, several different times, and going for several miles. One could argue, if you're a skeptic, well, that was just his brother laying down prints on the road, and that's possible. Yep. But, we don't know. That's the thing. And again, as I said earlier in the intro, Ray never admitted to hoaxing any prints. He had outlandish claims about other things, but one thing that he never ever claimed was hoaxing footprints. Maybe he never did. Maybe if you're of the mind that footprints were hoaxed in 1958, maybe someone else did it, like Bud Ryerson, for instance. He's a potential and possible culprit there. But I do find it interesting that Shorty is saying that he found many prints on many different roads back then and spanning many miles. Keep that in mind.
In fact, I was took Betty Allen up there one time. You knew Betty.
Yeah.
And we followed tracks there for about 4 miles that day, and that was the first time I think that was her first trip in there. You know, she was really interested in it, and she couldn't hardly believe it. But, you know, that you'd see them that many or that far, that, of course, that was her first experience with it too, or her first trip in there, I think, or I guess maybe she'd been in there one time before, but I don't know if she ever saw any tracks before that or not, really.
So,
I just wanted to take a moment to pay homage to Betty Allen. For those who don't know, Betty Allen was living in Willow Creek area back in 1958, and she was writing for one of the major newspapers there, and she was quite instrumental in documenting and compiling early Bluff Creek and surrounding area reports of Bigfoot. She would eventually move out of the area, but she kind of gets lost in the laurels of Bigfoot research. But she, no doubt, was most likely the first female Sasquatch researcher, Bigfoot researcher, that I'm aware of. And she did author a book that's quite rare. And it was the first book ever that we know of strictly about Bigfoot, although it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek book, but it still was a book about Bigfoot. She would move to Alaska where her family was, and also die in Alaska many, many years back. So I just wanted to give her a little bit of, pay some respects to her, because she did a lot, and she had a Bigfoot scrapbook, which is very interesting. And I remember reaching out to the family quite a few years ago, and they sent me some photos of that scrapbook, which is quite amazing. It has a lot of old newspaper articles glued into it, and different letters and things like that. And John Green had met her and corresponded with her quite a bit, and she was also involved on the peripheral with Tom Slick and what he was doing back in the early 60s and late 50s with the Pacific Northwest expedition.
was 1958 when they first made a fuss about it anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And in that year that things were
I
showing
think
up.
it was in the fall of '58. We'd seen them there for quite a while before that, but of course, all we did was talk about it till Jerry Crew made that cast, and then, you know, take it to the newspaper, and then it really boomeranged, but ballooned up. But
Of course, everyone should know the name Jerry Crew, and if you don't, maybe do some research, because Jerry Crew is the reason why most of us began our interest in Bigfoot, and some may argue that without Jerry Crew, maybe the Bigfoot legend wouldn't have taken off. It's hard to say. But anyways, if you want to learn more about Jerry Crew in great detail, I suggest read this book. It's the absolute best book written on the early history of Bigfoot from the late 50s up until mid 60s. And if you can't see it here, I'll make sure you can see it on the screen there, so it's very clear. And it's by Dustin Sievers, as you can see. It talks a lot about Jerry Crew and his background and things of that nature, so pick up a copy. But Jerry Crew, of course, found the infamous footprints on the Wallace construction site, cast them, and then his face and the images of the cast were strewn all over newspapers all over the world. So yeah, if you don't know Jerry Crew, then you might be kind of new to the study of Sasquatch Bigfoot, but I think you probably do. So I'll leave it at that. But if you don't have Dustin Sievers' book, pick up that book, because it is absolutely the best written on the early history of Bigfoot research and all the things that happened during that time.
Did you see your tracks pretty regularly that year, pretty often?
oh yeah, we'd see them. It seemed like that you'd see them more when the when the moon was bright, you know, growing or going down. That now in the dark of the moon, we hardly ever seen any.
I see. And have you seen them every year since?
Well, now the last couple of years I haven't here, and but before that I did. But I haven't been up in that country now. I haven't to say that. I was up there a year ago this last fall for a couple of weeks. But it was raining and snowing just about every day, and I didn't see any tracks then, and I didn't work in that country, and I never, you know, I didn't go up in there looking for any, because there was no advantage to me to...
Were you up there in '64 when they were showing up around the spar tree, the tower that was in there?
Yes, I was there then. All that year I worked in there.
And did you make any casts of them that year?
Well, yeah, I made some there on the creek, on Bluff Creek. Some of them turned out pretty good.
This cast that we have here, is that one of them, you think?
Well, I don't know. It must be. I thought I'd give all those away, but that must have been one of them there. And then I give Al Hodgson, I thought I'd give him 4. I thought I had 2 of each one. He must have given some of those away.
But this is sand that is in this cast.
Yes, it is.
So it would have to be one of the sandbar ones.
Yeah.
Not made up on the road. Uh-huh.
If the name Al Hodgson's does not ring a bell, he was living in Willow Creek from the late 50s up until his death, and he was kind of the go-to guy who was connected with everyone and anything to do with Bigfoot. He owned a variety store there. He had made some casts of some Bigfoot prints, and people would just talk to him, and he knew he really was in the loop, and he was the go-to guy. And as a matter of fact, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin went to visit Al after they came back from Bluff Creek on October 20th. They wanted to use his phone. I believe he had a payphone outside, and they wanted to make him aware that they may have filmed Bigfoot. So Al Hodgson's was quite a phenomenal figure in Sasquatch lore and Bigfoot lore, and he had a lot of information. And he's another one that gets kind of overlooked a little bit, but he was definitely the glue between a lot of people: John Green, Renee DeHinden, Bob Titmus, Roger Patterson, and anyone who was anybody back then knew of this man, Al. And that's who they're talking about right now, just to make it clear.
Whereabouts was that tower where the thing was?
Well, it was close to Bluff Creek.
Right down in the creek?
Well, yeah, no, it wasn't. Now, it was up from the creek there on the hillside, the place I'm thinking about, where these guys went in there and camped overnight, or 2 or 3 nights. When I told you they finally went to sleep after they got warmed up, and then the next morning the tracks was all around.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably, a quarter of a mile from the creek by road.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how far it would have been straight up, not probably 400 feet, if you know.
So it's probably just high enough so they could guard from the bottom up to the land, and also from the off the hillside.
Yeah, that was it. It was probably about a quarter of a mile from the creek there, and then they reached down to the road and took the logs up the hill.
So this would be a cast of the same tracks that we're seeing around the tower and on the road.
Yeah, I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Were you there when the thing threw a culvert over? Well, there were 2 instances. Apparently, one where it dumped them off the trailer, and another one it picked up a culvert and threw it down in there.
Well, I've seen where they've been, where it tipped this trailer over, and the other culverts, we had to take the cat, run the line off to drag the pipe back up the hill.
There were tracks around there then, wasn't
Oh yeah, there was tracks around there, up and down that road there for a couple miles.
Of course, what Green is referring to is that some culverts were seemingly tossed, and they think that maybe it was Bigfoot. It seems counterproductive that Wallace's crew or Wallace would do that to obstruct his own logging operation, a road building operation, but there are many who believe that because he was falling behind on his contract and timeline, that he purposely did these things so he could delay things and then explain it away and maybe get a little more time to finish the contract. But we don't know. That's the thing, we don't know. But there were oil drums, culverts, which all are very heavy, strewn about, seemingly by something very powerful. Was it one of the machinery that did it? We just don't know. That's the problem, we don't know.
There's a guy in Hoopall that was the boss up there on that road job there, name of Tom Osborne, on this trailer deal.
Yeah, well, we've got Blake told it, or Pat Graves told us.
Oh yeah, well Pat
Detail about
was
that.
the inspector on that job, but
Yeah.
we was on there.
He said he was there.
Of course, them guys, they used to, of course, they always accused me of doing it, or my brother, or somebody, you know, and they always really razzed me, you know, but I go right along with them.
Well, Graves told us he didn't see how anybody could trace it.
You know, they always accuse me, and I tell them, why, sure. They ask me if I'm making tracks, I tell them I'm making them every day.
Again, according to Jay Rowland, Shorty Wallace was salt of the earth. He was not a prankster, not a hoaxer. We know that Ray Wallace was a prankster. We know that, and we know that he embellished things and definitely made up things, talking about UFOs and having a Bigfoot, harbored away, feeding it. There's no doubt that he was either delusional or just seeking attention, or maybe both. We don't know. But one thing that is tossed around, and it started with the Wallace family after Ray Wallace passed away. They produced these what's called stompers, which are wooden planks shaped as a footprint, like a Sasquatch footprint, with leather straps on them. And they said that that's what their father or their uncle or their cousin, whoever it may have been, Ray, used to make footprints around Northern California and other places, including Washington State, where he ended up living, and other places too. And those stompers were passed around and used by other people. Yes, that's possible. However, John Green would argue that those stompers were made from prints that were found prior. And I mean, that's possible too. I'm going to say this whole video, we don't know. Some would argue that the footprints that were found later on in the Bluff Creek area, and say Blue Creek Mountain and Onion Mountain, they have a very characteristic shape that has not appeared at any other time that I'm aware of in the history of Sasquatch research. They only happen during a couple weeks actually, in that area of Northern California. And they have and I'll show you on the screen here, they have a very specific shape. However, the footprints that Jerry Crew cast seem to differ. But people argue too that you can see that shape in the Wallace stompers, and I'll show you, a great photo of various Wallace stompers here too. But again, which came first? The stompers or the actual footprints? You have to ask yourself that, because it's very easy to take what's already there and make copies of it. But of course, that doesn't fit into a skeptic's box, Because if you don't believe, or you're not of the mind, the Sasquatch Bigfoot exists, then it doesn't matter which order, because there can only be one order.
But you haven't seen any in the last 2 years. You
Oh,
haven't
no, I
observed
haven't.
it yet.
But I've been quite a ways from that area, too. Of course, when I was up in there, it was raining and snowing every day, and I wasn't really looking for any tracks either. We were trying to burn some old slash in there that they cleaned up after the flood, and we had to get that burnt and cleaned up there to finish the job, and that was my main interest at that time.
Well, now, from what I gather, these tracks were very common in 58 and also in 64. Now, were there years in between there when they weren't seen so often?
Well, yeah, there was. A lot of times there, it might go 2 or 3 months, a couple of months, I'd say anyway, that you wouldn't see any tracks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that it wasn't around there.
So the fact that there's been no tracks the last, or not many tracks the last couple of years, you don't figure is all that different from what it has been some other years?
Oh, well, I don't think so. I think that I'm sure that they're still in there somewhere or around the country. I don't know if they migrate or not, but in and out of there. Maybe they do, but I don't know. I really haven't ever spent any time in there in the wintertime. That road is always either washed out or slid in, that you can't get up in there very far usually, or snow. And I don't know if they're in there in the wintertime or not.
It's interesting to note that there seemed to be some dry years in the 60s where footprints weren't found at all. So it seems. And I think those years were 64, 65, 66. It just was a dry spell. For whatever reason. Of course, one could argue that the hoaxsters, or Ray Wallace, although he wasn't in that area at the time, I don't think. I think he was in Toledo at that time. Skeptics would argue that, the pranksters, the hoaxsters just weren't active during those years. Maybe. However, listen along, because you're going to hear something that may surprise you, that Jay Rowland talks about. Listen on.
And you pretty well, I gather, just seen tracks so often that you don't really think anything of it.
Well, no, it's just kind of a topic to talk about when, amongst the crew, but other than that, nobody ever says anything about it.
Mm-hmm. And Jay, I understand you've seen tracks more recently than Shorty, is that right?
Yeah, I've seen some in August of 65. I've seen some in September of 66. I don't know for sure where they come from, where they went. Building road, going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, didn't have no chance to look around any other little work.
And when you don't pay any attention, particularly when you see them.
You tell people about it and they laugh at you.
Uh-huh. But you have seen them both this past season and the year before that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And would this be down in Bluff Creek?
Yes, it would.
That's Jay Rowland speaking. So he's claiming to have found footprints in 1965 and 1966. He doesn't give the year, but based on when John Green did the interview in February 1967, some simple math tells you that Rowland is speaking of 66 and 65, which historically have been believed to be a dry spell for footprints, and the claim that no footprints were found in those years. But if Rowland is being honest here, he's claiming to have found some, and if he found some, perhaps others did too. Does that mean they're real? Of course not. Does it mean that maybe some hoaxsters were placing footprints? It could. I don't think that Ray Wallace was in that area at the time. I think he was by that time in Toledo, Washington. I think, but I could be wrong about that. Don't know. Because the interview is quite long, I'm going to break it into 2 parts. This is the end of part 1. Part 2 will be the next upload. There's some more interesting things stated in the interview, so hopefully you'll feel inclined to watch that as well. Take care.
If you're enjoying all this rare and unique content, please show your support by subscribing and leaving comments.